He
It's
cut deeper
okay.
than any blade.
You're safe
It
now.
clawed at Daniel Moore's face, stinging his eyes, numbing his hands until the reins felt like iron rods. The prairie stretched out before him in endless white, a place where the sky and earth met in silence and suffering. He hadn't planned to ride tonight. No sane man would. But when the fence line snapped and his cattle scattered toward the hills, he couldn't ignore it. The ranch was all he had left, the last thread of a life that had already unraveled too many times. He was halfway to the ridge when he saw it, a flicker of movement near the abandoned rail station, like a shadow against the snow. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the wind, but then came a sound, faint, fragile, like someone calling from far away. Daniel kicked his horse forward, heart pounding. When he reached the platform, he froze. A woman lay half buried in snow, her coat ripped, her skin the color of ash. Her hands clutched a small satchel, as though it were the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. Daniel dropped beside her, brushing frost from her hair. "Ma'am," he whispered. No answer, only a shallow breath that misted in the cold. Without another thought, he wrapped her in his coat, lifted her into his arms, and turned toward home, each step through the blizzard feeling heavier than the last. Inside the small cabin, he laid her near the fire, stripped off her soaked gloves, and began rubbing warmth back into her hands. She stirred faintly, whispering through cracked lips. "The train, it broke down. They said they'd come back." He pressed a cup of broth to her mouth. "You're safe now. Rest." Her eyes met his for just a second, weary, frightened, but alive. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt something spark inside him, the quiet ache of purpose. The storm held the land captive for 3 long days. Daniel tended to her like she was the last ember of a dying fire. When she could finally sit up, she smiled faintly. "You saved my life." He shrugged. "Just did what anyone would." But she shook her head. No, not everyone would have stopped. Her name was Grace Turner, a nurse on her way to Ash Hollow to start a new infirmary. The train had broken down in the storm, and when she went for help, the cold nearly took her before Daniel found her. Over the next week, she grew stronger, and the cabin, once silent as a grave, filled again with the sound of human life. She sang quietly while she mended his shirts, laughed softly when the kettle boiled over, and somehow made the small home feel like something sacred. Daniel tried to ignore the warmth building in his chest, telling himself it was just gratitude. But one evening, when she thanked him for saving her, he said without thinking, "Maybe you were the one who saved me." When the snow finally melted, Grace packed her things. "I owe the people of Ash Hollow my promise," she said. He nodded, trying to hide the ache in his chest. "You'll do good there." But when she rode away, the silence returned, heavier than before. Months passed. Daniel buried himself in work, but every sunrise felt smaller somehow, like the world had lost its color. Then came a letter, written in Grace's neat hand. The words carried both hope and despair. "Ash Hollow is hurting," she wrote. "Sickness and fear are taking hold. I try to help, but there's only so much one woman can do." Daniel read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat. By the next morning, he was already riding toward town. When he reached Ash Hollow, he barely recognized it. Dust and worry hung over every porch. Grace stood outside the infirmary, sleeves rolled up, eyes red from exhaustion. "Daniel," she gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Figured you could use an extra pair of hands," he said with a grin. She smiled through tears. You never could let someone fight alone. They worked side by side for weeks, mending fences, hauling water, tending to the sick. Slowly, the town began to stir again, but then came the fire. One summer night, a wind gust carried sparks from the blacksmith's forge straight into the grain mill. In moments, the whole structure was burning. Grace ran to help carry out the trap workers. Daniel followed, shouting orders through the roar. When the roof began to collapse, he spotted her inside, coughing through the smoke. He charged in, caught her by the waist, and dragged her clear as the building came down behind them. They hit the dirt hard, gasping for breath, smoke stinging their eyes. "Always saving me," she whispered weakly. "Guess that's just our way now," he said, voice breaking between coughs and laughter. Morning brought ruin, but also hope. No one had died. The townsfolk gathered to thank Daniel and Grace, their eyes full of gratitude and awe. The mayor offered Daniel a small parcel of land by the river if he'd stay and help rebuild. Grace looked at him, her smile quiet but sure. He nodded. Reckon it's time I stop running from life. Together, they built a home near the water, where wildflowers grew even through the ashes. Grace reopened the infirmary, and Daniel managed a new supply yard, hiring townsfolk who'd lost work in the fire. Years passed, and Ash Hollow began to thrive again. The laughter of children replaced the echoes of loss. At sunset, you could often see Daniel and Grace walking through town, her arm tucked in his, her voice carrying soft over the fields. They never talked much about the storm that brought them together, but everyone in Ash Hollow knew the story. And when winter came and the wind began to howl across the plains, parents would tell their children, remember the rancher and the nurse. Remember how kindness turned strangers into family. If this story warmed your heart, remember this. Every act of kindness leaves a mark that time can't erase. Daniel and Grace's story isn't just about love. It's about courage, mercy, and the quiet strength it takes to care for someone when the world grows cold. Here at Western Tales Memories, we keep those spirits alive. Stories of people who stood tall when life tried to break them, who loved deeply when it would have been easier to walk away. If you believe we still need that kind of strength in our world, subscribe, share, and keep listening. Because the next story might just remind you that somewhere, even in the coldest storm, love is still waiting to be found.